Recently, the Italian Supreme Court decided in favor of an intercompany loan without bearing interests if the business context of the operation provides grounded reasons to accept such conditions. The latest case of this kind, defined in 2022 by the Italian Supreme Court, was a loan granted by an Italian company to a related party abroad. The loan aimed to fund the foreign company to have resources to get stock of a Chinese company. The Italian company argued that the only way for the foreign party to get sufficient funds to procure the Chinese company was through a loan from its principal located in Italy, but the borrower may not bear interest payments. Originally, the loan agreement foresaw accruing interests, but later the parties agreed to amend the contract to keep the loan without bearing interests. The Italian party acting as lender stated that only by providing funds to the foreign party, the latter would achieve the acquisition of relevant stock of the target company. Therefore, it wouldn't make sense to generate a liability to the borrower bearing interests for the funds received. Therefore, the parties decided to change the conditions of the contract to agree to a free interest loan. Indeed, the tax agency of Italy disagreed with the reasonings of the taxpayer and raised the conflict to trial. Its position was clear and stated straightforward. No intercompany loan agreement can be done without bearing interests, notwithstanding the context of the situation to provide the funds. Conversely, the Supreme Court held an interesting view on these matters when determined that, in general terms, intercompany loans should bear interests. However, it was likely to find intercompany loans agreed with a 0% interest rate if there would have business reasons to support a free interest operation between related parties. The position of the court definitely is a plausible standing, but not so new if we revise the transfer pricing guidelines of the OECD and some precedents from the Shanghai Tribunal, which were mentioned in the court's ruling. Something to note is that an intercompany loan should respect the arm's length principle, although it was a free interest operation. Taking into account that transfer pricing rules are useful to confirm when a transaction between related parties has been carried out in similar conditions applied by independent parties in comparable operations, the absence of interest in a borrowing transaction doesn't mean that such transaction is exempted to apply the transfer pricing methodology. It's hard to believe that borrowing between independent parties may be accepted without consideration. However, if a free interest operation is connected with others carried on by the same parties, may have sufficient business reasons to agree to a financial transaction like that, which means a non-interest bearing loan. Businesses are not so straightforward. Therefore, every case should be revised accurately to determine not only when the interest rate complies with the arm's length principle, but when the absence of such interest complies too with transfer pricing rules, which is quite possible. Following the reasoning above, the Supreme Court of Italy determined that an intercompany loan may fulfill transfer pricing rules if there were commercial reasons to set out the operation without bearing interests. The District Court of Tel Aviv in Israel ruled in the Medingo case in favor of the taxpayer in a case where the tax administration assumed that a business restructuring in an Israeli technology company, after it has been acquired by a multinational, should be deemed as a sale of business, given that the transfer of functions, assets, and risks involved in the restructuring. The tax authority based its arguments on the Teco case, a milestone conflict defined by the judiciary in Israel, in which a shell company with no business contact intervened in the operation of acquisition. In the TECO conflict, the court ruled in favor of the tax authority. The outcome of this case was used by the authorities to set out the criteria to conclude that business restructures carried out after the acquisition of the target by another enterprise should lead to capital gains. Besides the TECO case, another important decision of the court is the Broadcom case. The Broadcom case is so relevant because it stated that a company that changes its business model as a consequence of having been sold to a third party not necessarily ends considering the restructuring operation as part of the original sale of the domestic company. However, the tax authority in Israel seems to insist that any restructuring of an Israeli company after a process of sale, modifying functions, assets, and risks, should be considered as a sale and its outcome a capital gain. Medingo Limited, the Israeli company under discussion, was sold to the giant pharma group Roche in 2010. After the sale, Medingo changed its role from principal to service provider and manufacturer, executing license agreements and service contracts with its new related parties. Important to note that the legacy IP was sold to Roche in 2013. The tax authority considered that changing the business model should not be part of a business restructure, but part of the sale of the company. Therefore, it assessed a tax liability of some $140 million. The court's decision overruled the assessment of the authority and ruled in favor of the taxpayer. It defined that changing the nature of a transaction could be done only when there is irrefutable evidence of the lack of substance or the operation under analysis is quite unreasonable. But these were not the case with Medingo. With a difference from the TECO case at Medingo, the intercompany agreements were done under a realistic context and were the conclusion of the new position of the company under the umbrella of the Roche Group. Therefore, there were no grounds to carry out the recharacterization of the operation disregarding the intercompany agreements. Finally, the court set out that it's quite reasonable that a business acquired by another one could modify its ratio of functions, assets, and risks involved in its operation, and these are not sufficient elements to conclude that such restructure has actually been a sale of business activity. I trust these videos help find new ideas to share with other Kreston colleagues and clients in the benefit of all. I am Guillermo Narvaez, Technical Tax Director of the Kreston Global Tax Group, and I'll see you in the next edition. Meanwhile, stay safe.